Hello, I'm Peggy Burns, Associate Dean for Development and Alumni Relations at the GSD. I'd like to welcome you, our friends from around the world, and thank you for joining us for the first GSD Town Hall. So our goal is to give you a sense of what's going on in the GSD by allowing you the opportunity to hear from our dean, from our program chairs and directors, and from several students. So I'd now like to formally introduce Dean Sarah Whiting. Sarah has been with the GSD for over 18 months. Due to COVID, I realize that this may be the first time many of you are meeting her. Despite these tumultuous times, Sarah is brilliantly steering the GSD. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our Dean, Sarah Whiting.
Thank you. Hello and welcome. I want to thank Peggy and her team for organizing this event, and I want to thank all of you for joining us and for giving us your time today. I also want to underscore that this event is not going to be comprehensive. It's meant to be a conversation between you, our broad alumni base and friends, and the school. It's also, I trust, one of many such conversations to come. 2020 was, simply said, an unfathomable year across the entire globe. We shut our campus, Gund, and our other buildings on March 14th, thinking it would be a brief hiatus, and here we are, almost a year later, witnessing a pandemic that continues to ravage the world, and particularly the United States. We can, however, glean some optimism now that several vaccines have become available. While the near horizon is still quite bleak, there's some hope that the world will find some degree of normalcy in this coming year. I'm really proud of the school for how we've coped during the pandemic. We have an unbelievably dedicated staff and faculty who've made it possible for our students to do what they do best, learn while pushing the limits of design and admittedly, while pushing the limits of their dean at times. I'm proud of our students. I attended as many reviews as I could in December and at the end of the spring term, and the work was astonishingly strong. I won't deny that it's been hard. As each of you knows, it's exhausting for everyone to share work only over Zoom and other platforms. It's also hard not to be together in Gund. Even the coffee and chow house seems really great. Well, if the taste wasn't always the best, just the vision of sitting together over coffee is as enticing as a dream of a Caribbean vacation. The school organized a task force comprised of faculty as well as our computer resource group and our librarians to help faculty with online teaching, ranging from troubleshooting to innovating. The development team stepped up right away to organize an emergency fund to help our students, assisting with everything from funding to help pay for a ticket home to funding student research projects for those whose summer internships were canceled due to the pandemic. Our students created new forums and formats, especially for incoming students, putting together an orientation that extended across much of the summer to compensate for new students not getting to meet one another in person. There's more we can do and more that we will do. It's definitely a challenge to help such a big constituency whose needs are so diverse. We were knee-deep, or maybe monitor-deep, in pandemic response when the events of this past summer brought the country to the point of crisis regarding structural racism. While we keep hearing that there have been such tipping points before, I would argue that the combination of video footage and undeniable racism made last summer the final straw. This country has begun hard work to reckon with its history. The school has also been put in a position to reckon with its own reality. We have an incredibly diverse student body in global terms, but frankly, we have lots of work to do before we can say we have a diverse student body in racial or economic terms. We've made school-wide commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion, including making changes to existing courses, adding new courses, expanding our student and faculty recruiting, diversity training for faculty and staff, and programming in the form of lectures, conferences, and discussions. Again, there's more that we can and will do. This is not a commitment that can be short-term. The Alumni Council stepped up immediately by putting together an extraordinary conference that took place in September, Transformation at the Intersection of Equity, Climate Change, and Health, the first of what has become their robust design impact series. That conference was followed by one in December on homelessness, ethics, policy, and action. Their next conference will be in late February, addressing design agency and climate change in South Asia. And they have others planned throughout the spring. These conferences have been a real highlight for me this year. It's exactly what the GSD should be doing. collecting the intelligence and expertise of our broad network across disciplines and across the world to provide venues that share and advance design. With all of this and my own personal health issues in addition, which are, as of the end of December, all clear, we welcomed New Year's Eve eagerly, awaiting the end of 2020 and an entirely new world ahead. Given that aura of optimism, the events that took place last Wednesday in Washington, D.C. couldn't have been more appalling on so many levels. Violence, hate, and a belief that one can determine one's own truth without evidence. These aren't the values that underlie the founding of this country, and they certainly aren't the values that underlie our school. We're in an unprecedented moment. I personally tend to see the world through optimistic lenses. And so I can only hope that this is the ultimate low from which we'll all climb. But I remain anxious. I remain committed to ensuring that all of those at the GSD as students and you as alumni understand that we're united by a belief that design is a language that transcends divisions and is a language that can never be separated from evidence. I remain steadfast in ensuring that the GSD will be a world that respects others, that fosters empathy, and that advances design while understanding the complexities of context and of constituencies. President Bako issued a short statement on behalf of the university on January 6th. If you haven't seen it, you can find it in full on the Harvard Gazette website. I want to end by quoting his two final sentences, which I think resonate for all of us. He said, "The time has come for people of every political persuasion to denounce the lies, lawlessness, and violence that have brought our nation to the brink of constitutional crisis. As members of a university committee dedicated to truth, learning, research, debate, and service, we condemn ignorance and hatred and stand in support of the rule of law and the role of knowledge." As you'll hear in today's town hall, we've been working together to do lots of things at the school. You'll hear more from my colleagues from our different programs, but again, we're not offering a comprehensive open house today. We're here to talk with you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'd now like to turn things over to Mark Lee. Mark is the chair of the architecture department, and Mark will be the first of our faculty leaders to speak. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Peggy, and welcome all of you. I'm delighted to share with you how the school year is progressing for the architecture department with some highlights from this past fall and some updates for this coming spring. Although we have been virtual this year, live conversations continue the tradition of architects responding to and taking issues on the position of others. 5 on 5 is the name of a series of live conversations where two guests are invited to present 5 projects, either of theirs or of others, that have been pivotal in their thinking and their body of work. Titled after the series of polemical essays published in the 70s, these conversations are less about presenting one's work, but the influences behind the work. And they aim to bridge different backgrounds and generations, creating dialogues between our faculty and visiting faculty, or between senior and junior faculty. This past fall, the series started with Medellin-based architect Camilo Restrepo with our Iman Fayyad, and followed by the Minneapolis-based Jennifer Newsom with our thesis director Eric Howler, and then followed by the Santiago-based Diego Grass with Yoshiharu Tsukamoto, the partner at Atelier Bow Wow from Tokyo. And then the series concluded with the Rotterdam-based Joe Flores, partner of the Office Monadnock, with our Jeanette Koo. And it was an interesting conversation where they candidly shared their grievances and lessons learned from lost competition. So exposing the skeletons in their closet, so to speak. And even though we live in a digital world, we still believe very much in the enduring power of the printed book. So there are quite a few recent faculty publications. Toshiko Mori, our professor in practice of architecture for many years and our former chair of the department, published the book Architect Observations that highlights a series of socially impactful projects, including the Portable Concert Hall is a nonprofit work for an affordable concert hall in remote and underserved communities. The Novartis Institute for Biomedical Research, with emphasis placed upon socialization among scientists as a new model of teamwork, as well as the beautiful projects in Senegal, Africa that dealt with vernacular typologies. Jeannie Gang, a professor in practice, had a new book titled Studio Gang Architecture. It is the first comprehensive monograph on the practice that brings together 25 critical projects over 2 decades, from the award-winning Aqua Tower in Chicago and the Writers Theater in Glencoe to the much anticipated upcoming buildings for the American Museum of Natural History in New York and the new global terminal at the O'Hare International Airport. Rahul Mehrotra, John Dunlop Professor in Housing and Urbanization and Chair of the Department of Urban Planning and Design, was also the founder of the Mumbai and Boston-based RMA, and he published a book titled Working in Mumbai. Well, normally we don't like to advertise for the other department, but it's a great book that encapsulates the projects and activities of RMA over the last 30 years, including, among others, a campus for an NGO that works with helping poor children, a project for 100 elephants and their caretakers in Jaipur, as well as the restoration projects of the palaces of Hyderabad and a conservation master plan for the Taj Mahal. It is a book where one really learns more about the work of RMA through Mumbai as much as one learns more about the city through the work of RMA. And besides conversations and books, central to our curriculum are the design studios. The exciting ones from last spring includes Farshid Musavi's studio that addressed both the immediate and long-term impact of COVID on our home and work environments, focusing on the scale of a residential block to provide a supportive live-work environment for diverse low-income households that need to supplement their earnings with home-based work. We had the visiting critic, Emmanuel Atmasu, a partner of the office Adwol that work on projects in Ethiopia and Australia. He had a studio titled After Property and forwarded the questions of how architecture can be disentangled from property, or how we can use this moment of global lockdown and protests to disassemble regimes of speculation and displacement that anchor the built environment. His studio focused on ordinary spatial practices against the hegemony of real estate and reframing architecture in solidarity with contemporary movements that oppose displacement of marginalized communities. Also, some sneak preview of some exciting option studio coming in this spring. I'm just excited to have Architectus, a Barcelona-based practice, who will be teaching an option studio. They are an office that came of age during the economical crisis there, but they developed a way of using humble materials and methods of construction combined with a strong conceptual approach to design that resulted in a body of work that is wholly original. They have a studio titled Small Institutions, and will focus on a primordial way of understanding small-scale public institutions and treating the lack of space as a positive condition where one is forced to prioritize and be radical. Our Arthur Roach critic, Christopher Lee, a partner of the London, Singapore, and Mumbai-based Siri architects, will be offering a studio that introduces 3 shifts in the design of collective housing in London that corresponds with 3 interrelated themes of Midtown, which challenges how we integrate workspace with dwelling spaces and amenities, mid-rise, that the 6 to 12-story buildings are the most effective scale for cross-laminated timber construction, a carbon neutral construction method, and mid-door, the rethinking of in-between spaces as environmental buffers that mediate different microclimatic zones. We'll also have the visiting critic Brian Lee, a national design justice advocate and the principal of the New Orleans-based practice Colloquit. His studio is titled The New Black Deal, which will explore architecture that was made manifest as a result of privilege and power structures that defines the overlapping histories and systems of racial violence. And I would like to conclude this very brief and abridged overview of the department by highlighting the need of support for more endowed student fellowships, for us to remain competitive in attracting future thought and practice leaders in the field. So for those who are interested, please contact the GSD Development and Alumni Relations Department, or Michael Volony, our Assistant Dean of Development and Alumni Relations, who will be today's moderator for our breakout session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. We appreciate it. And now I'd like to turn things over to Anita Berrizbeitia, who is the chair of the Landscape Architecture Department. Welcome, Anita. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Sarah and Peggy. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you all for coming. It is very nice to see so many of you here tonight. I'll begin by saying that in spite of the terrible crisis of 2020, the department is doing quite well. We are fortunate to have more than 40 brilliant, tenacious, and creative faculty, some of whom are here with us tonight, who have committed all of their energy to adapting to the new conditions of remote teaching. It has been a year of continuous self-evaluation and dialogue. It has not been easy by any stretch of the imagination, but it has been immensely rewarding, particularly because initiatives that were started a few years ago came to fruition this fall, and I want to share some of these with you today. The first one is that we have a new climate class. It's called Climate by Design, required for all MLA students. The class asks the fundamental questions of what is climate change, what are the policies in place, and more importantly, how does design respond to these new forms and conditions of practice? The class is team taught by design and ecology faculty with many guest lectures. It explores the interface between science policy and design in key case studies around the world. The class also explores future projections on the nature of design itself as it transforms its methods and scope of work to engage the scales and complexity of climate change. The case studies are organized according to their underlying frameworks for action, whether resilience, adaptation, or mitigation, or a combination of these. And in addition to the case studies, the class has produced reference materials such as a comprehensive atlas of climate change. A second update is that we have organized our course such that it clearly reflects the urgency of the issues that characterize our present time. So course 1 and 2 explore who we design for and why, basically landscapes of the public realm, and what are the values embedded in public landscapes, such as the basic rights, free speech, access to clean air and water, and to space for social life and for communion with nature. Course 3 and 4 are about political ecology in regional and urban landscapes, especially in relationship to climate change and its multiple effects of environmental and social justice, including a focus on issues of landscape and labor. Both of these studios will participate in the Green New Deal Super Studio initiated by the McCart's Center at UPenn and others. So please stay tuned for that announcement. Environmental and social justice permeate our offerings in option studios and electives. On the left, you see the list of topics in our option studios, and I want to point out the studios that address equity in design, a more inclusive narrative in our monuments and sites of commemoration, the right to access to agricultural resources, and climate change in a variety of sites that are at particular risks. On the right, you see a list of our electives. We have embraced change in all the components of our curriculum. And as mentioned before, this has taken a great effort from the faculty, many hours of conversation with the students, a hard look at what we teach and how we teach it. And I have to mention quite a bit of communication and collaboration across the 3 departments, which I have found especially productive and rewarding. It has been both nerve-wracking and exhilarating to deliver a transformed curriculum under the conditions imposed by the pandemic. For example, as you know, an important part of our curriculum is delivered outdoors. And this has not been possible since last March. Here you see images of our plants class field trips before COVID. These images must be very familiar to most of you. And this is what field trips look like this year. Videos and drone footage by the instructors of the sites at multiple scales. Combined with self-directed visits of each student at their locations around the world, we have taught them how to look, what to look for, and how to understand and perceive the landscape remotely. With challenges come discoveries of new possibilities, and this has certainly been the case this year. There are many more examples I could show you, but for now, I'll say that for sure, the efforts has changed the way we think about teaching and how we do it, and some changes are here to stay. However, we look forward to returning to Rand Hall and to seeing you in person in the near future. Thank you again for coming.
Thank you so much, Anita. I know that we'll look forward to expanding on your thoughts on this work during the breakouts. I'm now pleased to introduce Rahul Mehrotra. Rahul is the chair of the Department of Urban Planning and Urban Design. Rahul, to you.
Thanks very much, Peggy. Thank you, Sarah. And really great to see all of you. And thank you for being part of this town hall. It's amazing going through these names. I see students, I see colleagues who were in school with me, and many others who I admire and have known. So lovely to be here and spending this time with you. So in our Department of Urban Planning and Design, I mean, I think we made a very successful pivot to the virtual. Very pleased with it. In fact, I'm happy to speak about this in the breakout rooms. There are many traces that will remain because many things worked out even better than they did often when we were in Gun. So it was a combination of the two. And it was interesting that because we're an international program, this got heightened in our minds and experiences. Especially in the urban design program, we had really stretched ours. I mean, the time became elastic in the virtual world. Many of us were teaching across a 12-hour period, and that was challenging, but I'm really grateful to the faculty in the department who really responded to that in productive ways. In terms of the highlights, just sort of recapping them, I mean, there were many, and again, we can discuss these in details, but one of the things we did in the Urban Planning and Design Department was really a self-assessment, given everything that was surrounding us politically, which was incredibly productive because much emerged from that, which is now guiding us in our choices in how all the way from admissions, curriculum support, awards, we're looking at all these aspects that we engage with in ways that respond to the situation that surrounds us and the lived experiences that students bring to bear in the program. We also use this opportunity to use Martin and Sarah's word, use the opportunity to have kind of pilot projects for courses, projects to think about where we would build capacity. And we very clearly identified that we want to really pay attention to diversity, to indigenous design, and we want to pay attention to environment, climate change, infrastructure. And I'm saying them all loosely because we find they're a web, they're connected, we can't detach them. So we have to think of them collectively. And in doing this, the two kind of experiments, or three, one was looking at the First Nations. Dan Dioka did 2 modules of a studio, and that's something we're going to seriously build out in the fall. Gerald Caden led a course for us called Planning for Climate. Given the power to convene that the virtual offers us, he managed to get a incredible spectrum of people to participate in the course, all the way from Alan Dodd, who's the Chief Resiliency Officer of the City of Miami, to Henk Ovink, who represents, is a special envoy for water matters for the Kingdom of Netherlands, as his title says, Linda Shee, who's a professor at Cornell. Now, this helps us articulate also our needs. It helps us understand these areas of study, like climate change. It's so broad, but how do we nestle environment and infrastructure? So it's allowed us to develop collectively, the faculty, an approach to what our needs would be when we build out these areas. So that's why I call it a pilot, because it was done very mindfully with informing how we might sort of go on. Similarly, we did a studio in Afghanistan as part of the Aga Khan Studios, which was fascinating because we usually go to cities, we go to places we can access, which are perhaps safe. But here we took a site in kind of the hinterland of Afghanistan, very remote, with landscapes that we had never encountered before, which were sort of characterized by landslides, very unstable soil conditions, extreme situations, which allowed us to look at a whole gamut of issues, but allowed us again to convene and access stakeholders that we can't usually even do when we visit these places. And so that was quite an interesting experience. We also worked with Kabul University. So it was, I think, quite a range of experiences, so to speak, the students and us as faculty kind of engaged with. And again, I think this will inform the way we think about studio pedagogy. And so these 2 pilot projects, I think, are going to inform our pedagogy going forward. And they were, for me at least, some of the highlights in the limited time that I can share with you. Going forward, I think we are positioning ourselves as a department very much picking up on the dean's mandate also of interdisciplinary work, but also as a bridge department, because we have urban design and urban planning. We have designers who are architects, who are landscape architects, and we have planners who engage with the city and kind of bring other dimensions, allow us to make bridges with the Kennedy School, which we want to work on and reestablish, because that has weakened over the years with the School of Public Health, but also with other departments. And so in this spring, we are offering 6 studios, of which 3 studios are jointly, 1 with landscape and 2 with architecture, again, purposefully, so that we engage our students and other students through these forums in hopefully more interdisciplinary work. And so that's an interesting range of studios, which I'll just sort of flag out very quickly. You know, Joan Busquets is doing one in China, which is looking at the idea of the expo. Jung Yoon Kim is doing one. She's a landscape professor, and with Anita and I have been working on this. We're looking at a hyper-local studio, which is we're looking at Harvard Square and looking at the underground system of tunnels under Harvard Square and how this can begin to inform what's at Harvard Square. And so we're going to have students internationally now working on a very local studio. So it's kind of flipping what we usually do, where we sit in Cambridge and we, you know, go out to different parts of the world and come back. We're doing a studio with Mark Angeli, which is looking at Ethiopia, industrial townships there. Michael Murphy from Mass Design is doing a studio on the Fringe City in America, the idea of renewing, the future of renewal for the small American town. John Rahim, who used to be the ex-director of urban design and planning in San Francisco, is doing a studio which is looking at African American neighborhoods in transition and the kinds of challenges, those communities, but also the forces of real estate and all of that. Heinrich Wolf, an architect from Cape Town, is doing a studio that's looking at the heart of Cape Town and looking at affordable housing and infrastructure. And Chris and Fernando Muniz from Sao Paulo are doing a studio which is an intersection of landscape and urbanism that's looking at the river and the urban fabric of Sao Paulo. So that's the range. I know Peggy wants me to get off. I'm going to say one sentence. We are committed to creating these bridges between the departments. And I think we see that as a mandate, using the virtual effectively. But also we are mindful of trying to create a balance between the different geographies we engage with in the experiences the students of the GSD are exposed to. So thanks very much, and happy to talk more about all of this.
Thank you so much, Rahul. I hope that our guests around the world see how enthusiastic our chairs are and how lively the debate and conversation can be during the breakout. So thanks, Rahul. That was a great overview. It's now my pleasure to introduce Martin Bechthold, who is happy to announce that for the last week, he is the former director of the Doctorate of Design program. We're grateful to him. Please take it away, Martin.
Sure. Thanks, Peggy. Thanks, Sarah, for having me. Great to see everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. So since we have very few details, alumni on the event tonight, I thought I would give you a very brief snapshot of the program. I'll keep it brief again. We go across the departments, looking at topics in architectural landscape and urban planning and design. This slide here, just want to share you, this is the sort of geography of this program. So this is not a badly drawn world map. This is the sort of affiliation of doctoral projects with departments. On the top is architecture, middle is landscape, and below is UPD. And right now, it's pretty much evenly distributed between the 3 departments in terms of primary advisors. I'll give you a snapshot. We have about 50 students right now and 18 faculty primary advisors. Obviously, we have a faculty council running the program. And below, the curve shows the kind of number of students we have historically admitted. The program is now about 35 years old. Let me skip to my last slide. And this is a range of topics that our current second-year students, actually first-year students, are actually working on. So topics have become, I think, much more interdisciplinary than they may have been when I entered the program about many years ago, 2 decades ago. And you can see that the doctoral students deal with very timely topics of climate change, of degentrification, issues of justice and equity. I think as all programs, the leaders program was, of course, affected by the pandemic. However, we were probably affected in a different way, that we don't offer coursework. The coursework is, of course, delivered by the departments. Now, doctoral students often have to do fieldwork in other countries. That, of course, was difficult, to say the least. Most students were not able to travel, and that essentially brings a doctoral program to almost a pause. There's sometimes only so much you can do without actually going to the place. Second, of course, going to archives. For those of our students who have to do archival work, equally difficult. We have students who do experimental work with robots, with machines, with other devices. That for several months was not possible. Some of those students are now able to go back into the labs and operate their machines in a kind of a setting of some safety. I will add a quick historical note that the DITA student was actually already offering a remote option in 1998. When I joined it, there was a student who was actually based in Hawaii, who was an active doctoral student. I remember being a very big TV screen. Bechthold rode into the classroom for her to sign on to our sessions. The option was discontinued, but I do want to bring this up here because it is an interesting detail to take note of. We crafted a wonderful mentorship program whereby all first-year students were welcomed by student mentors that worked with them throughout the summer. That was in particular recognizing the current situation to maintain and create community, which is one of the difficult parts of the pandemic. Another thing I would like to mention and invite you all, on April 10th, some of our DDAS and PhD students will organize a conference around bias and equity in research. That event will be open to you all and to the public. We wanted to take this opportunity to really question those issues, and this is going to be an entirely student-led event. April 10th, I hope we'll see you all there. With that, I'll give it back to the moderator, to Peggy.
And I'd now like to turn things over to Michael Hayes. Michael's director of the Masters in Design Studies program. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks, Peggy. Over the past few years, the MDes program has really been refined and its mission has been sharpened. It's grown a lot in the past few years. I wanted to shout out John May for the work he's done. MDes, it's been really strengthened, and it's very, very strong right now. And Sarah too has been really committed to the program. So I think the alums of MDes should know how it fits into the school and how it's become more a vital presence in the school. And I just want to remind also the alums of the other programs of MDes vital presence. It's helpful to initially to think of the MDes program in relation to and as one of the 4 postgraduate or post-professional programs at the GSD. Like MARC2, MLA2, like MDE, it's now a 2-year program. But it draws, I would say, in compared to some of the other postgraduate program, it draws more from scholarship in the humanities and social sciences as well as design. The MDes has no studio, and that's become something that actually defines it more clearly as a research program based on a core set of courses. And it enables careers in public service, academia, things like NGOs, innovative ventures, as well as developing a specific expertise for design practice and teaching. I would say also in comparison, the MDes has become more individualized, even more speculative, and is becoming in the last couple of years increasingly engaged. I would even say it's become almost like an activist program in some of its practices. And I'm thinking in terms of its immersion in issues of climate change, of social relations, and really the planetary dimensions of cultural life. It's really sharpened its definition. And we've tried to take advantage of that growth in its reconfigured form that we put in place this fall. So applicants now will select one of 4 domains of study or bodies of knowledge or frames, ecologies, narratives, publics, and mediums. And then they undertake a core set of courses, including research methods, topical courses, and they follow, following that domain foundation, each student then forges her own individualized trajectory, as we call it, through the curriculum, taking advantage of courses at the GSD, but also other schools. And the relationship of other schools for the MDes program has become increasingly important over the past few years. And in a way, a very exciting thing now during their fourth semester, MDes students from all 4 domains will come together to focus on a research project that has an individual dimension, but is also in collaboration with a small team in the form of what we're calling for now open projects. It's in which their expertise that they've gotten over the first 3 semesters can find application on a very current issue led by a very high level expert. In open projects, it's what we're developing most now. It presents real opportunities for high-level experts and visitors coming into the GSD for MDes, of artists and other scholars coming into the MDes, for research, travel. It really presents a high level of opportunity that will make the MDes, I think even it will contribute to characterizing the MDes in terms of this activism and engagement. We're just about to begin our admissions process for next year. 624 applicants to the program. That's up 22% from last year, which was already up from previous years. And that's for a target enrollment of about 90 or maybe even under 90. So that makes our acceptance rate around 14%, which is great. It's really something to be proud of. So I think as alums, you're going to be very proud of how the MDes is moving forward. And I look forward to seeing you in the chat rooms to be more specific about the program. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. We very much appreciate your time. And I'd now like to turn things over to Martin Bechthold. Martin has many hats at the GSD, but he is now focusing on one hat, which is the director of the Masters in Design Engineering program. So thanks for joining us, Martin, and now to you.
Sure, thank you, Peggy. Thank you, Sarah. Great to be here this morning. I have a few slides. We can start those, Lindsay. I use my 5 minutes to also very briefly introduce this very new program to you, which popped up here in our chart about 5 years ago. So I'm going to talk about this little triangle on the upper right-hand side. This is our Master in Design Engineering program, a program of 2 schools, a collaborative effort with the Harvard Engineering School. Much of our required coursework over 2 years of studies is project-based. Students form interdisciplinary teams, work with stakeholders, and develop prototypes to solve complex societal dilemmas. In our first year studio, we don't give students problems to solve, but every year we decide on a domain that provides a context for faculty, teaching methods to understand the architecture of complex problems, develop solutions, and prototype those. Given the remote teaching, we quickly decided on telepresence as this year's studio theme. The theme allows us to tackle both challenges and opportunities that the pandemic has brought about. Here's an example of a digital product, a working prototype produced within 6 weeks that allows a remote clinician in the upper left-hand side to monitor hand conditions of a patient located elsewhere. These projects are produced within interdisciplinary teams of students that are required to work with stakeholders, to do interviews, to understand both the system and the individual levels of a problem. To prepare students for studio, which is a new culture for many of us students that might have an engineering background, we conducted a new pre-term workshop that produced a kind of, tried to look at the produce community, did various icebreaker activities, and did, for example, a broad mapping of the telepresence and telemedicine space. We really made a concerted effort this year to build community, within our first year students that are living in various countries and time zones. Actually, this is a slide I wanted to show. Again, the important thing about the project is that we need to look at the human experience and at the system level of all those problems. Otherwise, we don't believe we can really come up with a complete understanding. Our frameworks class, think about it as a compressed MBA curriculum that is delivered over 2 semesters, was relatively little affected by the pandemic. We moved obviously from the classroom onto Zoom, but the topics remained very much the same. We added a second instructor. This is now being taught by Luba Greenwood from CEAS and Jock Heron from the GSD. In the second year independent design engineering project, we started this year with a critical evaluation of all the methods that we tend to use, from problem analysis, prototyping, and assessment. We interrogated the degree to which these methods might be affected by a question of bias, how they can lead to better activity. So we started the year with a very critical analysis that is helpful to allow students to step back and really kind of forge a kind of a good solid path for their projects. Here we see a few of the past projects. So here again, students spent a year working with stakeholders to understand a complex societal problem of their choice within any domain of their choosing, and then producing prototypes. And they presented their first prototypes at the end of the fall semester. Then we talk very briefly about alumni, some of whom might be on the call. The program over 5 years has produced about 7 startups. These are some of their sort of websites, and they actually continue despite the pandemic to get traction. I actually have a call with an angel investor. They want to discuss 2 students who are running a startup. They just want to get some context. So these students are actually succeeding on launching this effort despite the situation. Just to give you a sense of where students are either doing internships or working. So a broad range of industries and nonprofits. With that, I'm at the end, and I hand it back to Peggy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. So we hope that we've given you a quick sense of really an appetizer teaser of some of the amazing work that's going on at the GSD. I'd now like to take the time to introduce our 2 GSD students who would like to share their perspective with you. And I think it's fabulous to hear from our brilliant students. So we have 2 students speaking today. First, I'd like to introduce Stephanie Lloyd, who's the academic chair at the Student Forum, and she's on track to graduate with a master's in architecture in 2022. And then we will hear from Stephanie's colleague, Student Forum President, Mena Ahmed. Mena is working towards a dual degree in architecture and landscape architecture. So I'll turn things over to you now, Stephanie.
Thanks, Peggy, and hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. I guess I'm in the morning. I don't know where you are, but I'm Stephanie, and I'm currently a 3rd-year student in the MArch1 program here at the GSD, and I'm also the academic chair of the Student Forum. I'm originally from the Bay Area, and I graduated from UC Berkeley in 2015 with a bachelor's degree in architecture. And I chose the GSD because of its multidisciplinary approach, stellar faculty, and competitive financial aid package. And honestly, as a first-generation student, it was kind of hard to pass up an offer from Harvard. At the GSD, I've taken a number of classes that are highly collaborative and interdisciplinary in nature. This past fall, I had the privilege to take Jeannie Gang's option studio, Can Parkitecture Heal? The studio focused on the principles of the Green New Deal as a guiding framework for the reimagination of architecture in the national park system. In collaboration with my colleague, Ada Thomas, a candidate in the Master's in Landscape Architecture program, we proposed a series of gathering centers for the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And we're also excited to share, we just recently found out that our project has been selected for submission to the Green New Deal Super Studio, which is a national exhibition of student work organized by the Landscape Architecture Foundation. Jeannie's Option Studio is just one of the many courses offered at the GSD this year that have broadened the conceptual scope to better include issues of race, equity, healthcare, and the environment, all of which are key themes that students and faculty have shown an increased interest and dedication to pursuing. In a way, this new remote context has made taking on these new and urgent issues easier for students and faculty. The Zoom platform makes inviting guest speakers from a range of disciplines easier than ever before, and many faculty members have adapted their courses to make these discussions a central component to the course structure. Virtual instruction has also resulted in a move away from the production of physical models, which we kind of just touched on in our little breakout room. But this has allowed students to delve deeper into other aspects of their projects or design research. Even though lectures and coursework transitioned fairly well to remote instruction, it was the seemingly small social moments that the students of the GSD community have expressed missing the most. Aside from beer and dogs, which is no doubt an institution, we're missing late night chats with our buttmates or bumping into faculty over lunch at Chow House. I'm sure you can all attest to the energy that buzzes through the trays on a Tuesday evening, or the chatter amongst friends in the moments before a lecture in Piper Auditorium. The GSD has managed to transition the essentials of a graduate program to a remote learning environment, but students are still searching for a substitute for the camaraderie of the trays. This has also been a rewarding year for student leaders in our community. As the Student Forum academic chair, in a normal year, I would have typically worked with students to provide feedback on curriculum and maybe say about course evaluations. But in this new context of remote learning, my position of academic chair has swelled to include new responsibilities, from moderating school-wide and departmental town hall Zoom meetings with Mark many times a semester, to working directly with the Academic Affairs Office to reconsider course schedules for a semester spread across multiple time zones. Being a student leader in the past year has meant advocating for institutional change on behalf of our peers, compounded by the emotional effects of social isolation, all while handling the daily stresses of our coursework. Overall, I've been extremely impressed with the GSD's flexibility to adapt to remote instruction. This flexibility has certainly produced important institutional changes that will stay well past our eventual return to campus. I'm really grateful to be part of this community, and I appreciate all of the work that has gone into making what I've seen as a successful year of virtual instruction. And even more, I'm just struck by my peers who have shown resiliency above all else, despite the many challenges this new remote context brought. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. And now to you, Mena.
Thanks, Peggy. Thanks, Stephanie. Hello, my name is Mena Ahmed. I am a dual degree landscape architecture and architecture student in my 5th and final year. I'm also a 2-time elected Student Forum president and former Student Forum chair of diversity, inclusion, and belonging. One of the accomplishments I'm most proud of in my time in student leadership is establishing the role of Dean of Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging at the GSD. In my time as diversity chair, I realized I was the only person on Student Forum without an administrative counterpart or liaison. I felt as though students were coming to me with issues regarding their classroom experience and issues surrounding equity and discrimination that, while I cared enormously about, I was neither equipped nor trained to deal with on an institutional level. I advocated from the grassroots and ended up presenting the creation of this position to the then executive committee under Mohsen. I spent the following summer advising on the position details, and the next semester on a hiring committee, interviewing candidates. Almost exactly 2 years ago, we hired Assistant Dean of Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging, Naisha Bradley. And today we have a supported and growing Office for Diversity at the GSD. I'm enormously grateful that the GSD has taken the counsel and feedback of students and advocates seriously. I think various stakeholders at the GSD, be it students, faculty, or the administration, feel like making gains through advocacy comes at the expense of something else. But my approach has always been that supporting student causes is supporting the health of the GSD ecosystem in the present and in the future. And while I won't be the beneficiary of many of the causes that I have worked on, I consider it my responsibility to leave the school in a better place than when I entered it. Other notable projects I have worked on in my capacity as a student leader is representing the GSD at the Harvard President's Council and the Graduate Council as a voting member, and taking very seriously my role in uplifting the voice and the platform of the GSD among the larger Harvard community. I'm working with student groups and the administration on following through on the implementation of Notes on Credibility, which was a list of asks compiled by ASU and Africa GSD that advocated for addressing implicit bias and structural racism at the GSD and design academia on a whole. Finally, I'm very proud of succeeding in making course evaluations open to students so that they may read them while shopping for classes. It sounds like a simple accomplishment, but actually took many, many years of student advocacy. None of these accomplishments would be possible without the close relationship Dean Whiting has fostered with myself and student leadership. The Dean meets with us bi-weekly, which is an incredible and generous allocation of her time that signifies the respect and commitment the GSD has to its students. So in my spare time, I also do my homework. I'm currently in my thesis year, advised under Iman Fayyad, who I believe is here today. My thesis project is on the phenomena of vacancy in luxury housing as a practical outcome of real estate speculation and late-stage capitalism in New York City. I'm exploring what it means to design for vacancy, and I'll spare you further details at this time. I'm cognizant of time, but I'm always open to talking about it, and so feel free to drop me a note or an email about that. I'd just like to end by saying thank you for having me here, and I care deeply about supporting the GSD and have been committed to doing so as a student and hopefully soon as an alumni.
Thank you so much, Mena. And thank you, Stephanie. It's always wonderful to hear from our fabulous GSD students. So we'd now like to open things up for a Q&A with Sarah. And if you have a question for one of our students, that's great too.
Lois Rankin has put a question in the chat.
Fabulous.
And I'll read it to everyone in case you can't see it. So under COVID-19, we've become more local, appreciating our homes and our neighborhoods more. Whether you appreciate them or not, you're definitely dependent on them. Our new familiarity with video conferencing means we can converse with people all over the world and not just frequent flyers. How is the GSD taking advantage of this to diversify globally? Question from Rome, Italy. It's nice to see you there, Thomas, and your work there in Rome is excellent. So it's actually been hugely advantageous. I mean, you can see just by this gathering that we're gathering people in many different time zones, and we can do that. And we've been able to have visitors to classes with much greater ease through bringing people in with video chat. And I have to say that even faculty meetings have had 100% attendance because we've had people Zoom faculty meetings. And so I think that beyond the pandemic, we'll certainly be taking advantage of bringing people in for classes, for example, through something like Zoom, which clearly works very well. I think final reviews are always benefited by being in person, but I think we'll have a mix of in-person and telepresence to turn to Martin and MDE's theme from this year, from which we learned a lot. Susan is asking about the engineering degree and building. Yes, they got a new building, though no students are in that building yet. It's not open yet because of the pandemic. Do current students, architecture students, interact with this new program? I'll turn that to Martin. I think there are students obviously in the MDE program, but is there overlap with students from the other departments?
So the required courses are obviously not necessarily open to folks from other programs, but through the electives, there is plenty of interaction. They do common projects, they've done competitions together. So there's a lot of opportunity to interact in what is electives for the MDE students and often for the architecture students. Now, whether that takes them to the new building is another question. That obviously right now is off limits. The new building will have a MDE studio space. That's going to be quite generous. So we will definitely occupy that and kind of go back and forth across two sides of the river.
Benjamin asked, he mentions that we keep saying this is the first of discussions to come. It's because we think it's such a great format. Why didn't we think of it earlier? But thank you, Peggy, for bringing this to play. So we are all enthusiastic to continue this format. We also, I will say that the Alumni Council is incredibly active. So again, the Design Impact Series, I think, is also a very important way for our alumni to connect through the Alumni Council and through that conference series. I think that Peter put that in the chat earlier, and he can maybe repeat that. Another question for Martin: are students without an engineering background accepted into the design engineering program?
So yes, so by design, we want to have a kind of cohort of mixed students with mixed backgrounds, so some engineering, some design, some other. Those who don't have an engineering background will be required to take the Introduction to Computer Science at C. So everybody will have a kind of baseline technical capacity to build and prototype software. But yes, we definitely accept folks without a technical background.
Sarah, I have a question here that asks if you could speak on efforts ways that we can engage the alumni community to help recruit BIPOC students.
That's a really great question, because I think that's something that we are all aware we need to be doing. And I think, I think that one way is simply to reach out to people you know in your community and encourage them that the GSD is a viable option for them. I think a lot of students who don't go through the sort of, let's say, high-end pipeline of schools often think, oh, I could never get into Harvard. And I think it's partly just talking to students, talking to potential students about the possibility of coming to this school and putting them in touch with the school. I see John Aslanian is with us. He's our student recruitment director. Maybe you could speak to how students or how alumni could get in contact with you or the admissions office.
Sure. Hi, Happy New Year, everyone. Yeah, as many people have talked about, the numbers this year, I think it's pretty significant that there's a lot of interest for a variety of reasons. But obviously, you can always reach out to me, JJ Aslanian at GSD. Many of you, I see the faces already have that email. But then also, we're definitely using social media a lot more now. So I encourage you to follow, the GSD on Instagram, and we profile a lot of students that way. So I think that there's definitely, taking advantage of the formats, being able to really see a lot of the work that's going on that typically you had to be, bouncing from 121 to Stubbins to Piper to the Pit, and now you can just sort of do that a little bit online. So I think, this time of year, it's really about, if you know anyone that is interested, by all means, you can put them in touch with us, but also just, I think there's so many ways to kind of follow the school and what's going on from a sort of near distance, that at any moment when someone reaches out, or someone starts talking about an interest in how design can impact society, you say, well, there's some cool stuff going on at Harvard, and you should follow it yourself. So.
And I think that point about that's another format that we found was incredibly effective via Zoom, is our open houses and admissions events, where you're not obligating students to pay for a ticket to cross the country and take time away from a potential job or studies. And I think that's something that will continue, is allowing for online introductions to the school. A great question from Joshua Rosewood. How is the balance between individual achievement and collaboration in the, my chat keeps moving, in the culture of the GSD evolved over the years? Has there been any effort to make the GSD a more welcoming place? I hope you see from the tone of this event that indeed, I think we're trying to make the GSD a more welcoming event, atmosphere. The GSD core values underscore empathy and respect for others. And I think that there's still an interest in pushing students to do their best and to contribute. But I think the school has put quite a lot of emphasis on collaboration and working together and supporting one another. And I think we've seen that particularly in this difficult environment of Zoom. But I do think there's a different atmosphere in the school. I hope so. Certainly, it's something that I think is incredibly important.
Following up on the first question, are there plans on decentralizing or globalizing teaching through reaching out to alumni worldwide, whether in person, online, or through studios, practices, or offices we have spread around the globe? How can we help increase the global reach for dispersing GSD students now, and how can we help in the future? Thank you for that great global question.
That's a great question. And I think that we are in the process of reaching out to global alumni to see if they can offer support to our current students and alumni in their areas, particularly in countries where lockdowns have been relieved, right? So where students actually can get together. And so we've had some groups of students get together in China where the conditions are much safer right now. And so I think the best thing to do would be to reach out to the chair or program director from the program that you're interested in supporting. So that would be terrific.
So another question from Bob McLeod.
Bob's one of the first people who hired me to teach, so I owe Bob a lot.
Bob's wondering if we're looking at what we're looking at in the post-COVID world and considering what the school will look like. He comments we won't return to normal. What will the new normal be, and how will we shift? What practices can we take from this learning experience of COVID?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very good question. It's a hard question. I'm not surprised, Robert, to get that question. I think that the issues of what we look at, I mean, I think first there's a transition to how we come together again. But I think we're always, after this experience, going to have an awareness of the impact of space on health, form and space on health. I think that this will continue to help our sort of foster our relationship with the School of Public Health. But I think that it's something that as I said earlier, I think will have a continued reliance on Zoom in positive ways, whether we need it or not. I think it's actually expanding our horizons. But I think we're all more aware of the relationship of our physical bodies and our health, and the idea that coming together, which is something that we all support, is something that we also have to be careful to do in the healthiest of ways.
One of the things that people are intrigued with is a blending of disciplines and engagement. And you mentioned this in your opening remarks too, engagement across school, including, with our peer colleges, engineering, the Kennedy School, the Chan School. Can you talk a little bit more about how you hope to plan to build that, those connections even deeper?
Absolutely. I'll try and keep it brief so that all of you who are building up your courage to ask questions can get to your microphones. So I think for me, what attracted me to returning to the GSD is that it has a very strong core foundation in each of the departments. But it also then, every course above the core is open to anyone in the school. And so it has this sort of remarkable interdisciplinarity, which I think can only be successful if you have strong disciplines. And so I think that the option studios and Rahul did a great job of talking about how the option studios are really fluid across the departments at this point many times, particularly through UPD. But I think that is one area sort of in the studios, but also in the courses where that's very important. And then our other programs that are decidedly interdisciplinary are Master of Design Engineering, which is Martin Bechthold's other hat. He runs that program, is a collaboration with the School of Engineering, and is a sort of extraordinary recognition that we don't operate alone anymore as designers. The great thing about a design education is that you really are able to work across disciplines and across fields. We're developing, we have a program with the School of Public Health. We are developing new ties with the business school. My twin brother teaches at the law school, so I see future ties there for sure. And the Kennedy School is obviously a very close tie for us, as well as the GSAS, where we have the joint PhD program. So for me, it's really one of the extraordinary things about this school is again, the strong basis of the disciplines, and then the absolute opportunity of interdisciplinarity.
I have a question.
Fabulous. Quest away.
First of all, let me just say I'm a practicing architect, urban designer, and half of my work is that. Half is working with NGOs on the Sustainable Development Goals of UN Habitat. So I have my hands in two worlds, and I am overwhelmed, and I want to know if the students are overwhelmed with data unbelievable amounts of data, quantitative answers to everything, and few qualitative solutions for anything.
That's a very accurate and important distinction to draw. And I think that really our obligation as an institution of higher learning is to teach our students how to think. And I think part of thinking is learning how to process information and how, first of all, how to figure out what information is accurate. So having evidence for information, and facts are something we believe in. But then I think what to do with it. And so the importance of learning how to think. And so my ideal world for the GSD is having this big platform, but having small classes so that students really are put in a position where they have to think and talk and defend and support what they're doing. But I think that, you know, we all have endless information at our fingertips today. Learning how to frame that information, judge it, and do something with it is actually the really hard work. But thank you. I think that's a real challenge for all schools today.
To address this multidisciplinary context, I think we need to have a kind of shift in a kind of paradigm shift from being an individual who can do everything, but to work as teams with different disciplines. The school can have a certain workshops where they can bring people from different disciplines working on the same project, addressing different components. And the issue is how to deal with multiple component integrative planning at the end.
Thank you. Mena or Stephanie, do you have a comment on that as from a student perspective?
I'll just share that I think Mena and I will both say we're overwhelmed first to that question, Theodore. I think most of the most successful classes that I've been in have kind of preempted group work. And so struggling with the data or with questions together. And oftentimes those classes are seminars and workshops. And so as Sarah said, we are, you know, you're working with students from every program and every department. I agree that the data is overwhelming, but when each group is addressing a similar question, you really see the design thinking come through and how each group approaches that design problem. And I think that's really the strength of school. I don't think that in one semester, a group is going to hit the nail on the head and solve the issue, but I'm really impressed by the variety of thinking that I see from my peers.
Can I add?
Go ahead, William.
I actually, I'm a practitioner and operate all over Australia, New Zealand, and Asia. And I agree, there is an enormous amount of data in which you have to take into account. And there is an enormous number of professional skills and people that you have to deal with if you're dealing with any major urban problem. I think what I have learned, and I've learned to listen, and I've also learned to quietly lead. And that's what I think I got most from both my architectural training, because as an architect, you have to coordinate and organise structural engineers, mechanical engineers, every engineer. But as an urban designer and doing major urban projects, the gamut of professionals that you have to be involved with are substantially more. I well remember, many years ago at the Graduate School of Design, there was a thing at that point in time. They wanted to bury the central artery. And our team went in 1975, put together a team of people from multiple schools, and we got Ted Monticelli to be our professor, and we did a central artery depression study. And that was a unique experience at the Graduate School of Design. I participated in that, and I have carried a lot of the skills I learned in that studio for the rest of my professional life. And it was primarily to be able to listen and then quietly lead. So I
love
think you
that.
can have the
I
public
love that
participation.
pairing of listening and then quietly leading. I think that's quite wonderful. I think Anita can speak to a huge collaboration that was done with the Boston Harbor Islands that I think was a similar sort of game-changing studio for a group of students that had the ability to have that opportunity in the school at a point. I think those big studios that bring in these different collaborations are unique experiences and quite wonderful to have.
David Eisen makes a very interesting comment, not really a question, but worth noting. Alumni outreach runs the risk of reinforcing the limited demographic that enters the field. Globalization runs the risk of further separating the school from the surrounding community. I hope these efforts are balanced with local efforts to engage underserved communities.
I think that's a very good question. I think that we have, particularly in the core sequences of the departments, put quite an emphasis on studying Boston and understanding Boston as a very particular and charged environment, particularly for considerations of structural racism and other issues that are coming to the fore today, gentrification as well. Boston's become unbelievably unaffordable. And so I think that it's the balance of learning about our community here and using it as a case study, also for climate change. Boston Harbor is an amazing example. And so combining that with our global reach. And so that combination is something that we're very aware of. I think one of the challenges that we have, that any school has, is how do you balance all the things that you want to expose your students to in the short time of their studies, but these riches that we have between Boston as one context and our global reach as another context is something I won't complain about.
And Irene asked a question on admissions, and John answered it, but just for the audience, Irene asked if admissions is upticked in all programs, and the answer to that is yes, across the board.
We had a huge jump in admissions. I haven't spoken yet with my peer deans to find out if that's something that happened at all schools. I can imagine that after the pandemic that people are wanting to go back to school, but it certainly means more work for our admissions committees, but we're enthusiastic for the opportunity.
We probably have time for one last question, if there's another question to come in, or if not, Sarah, I might conclude by asking, or if you have comments, go ahead.
So I do, and I will say I just glanced. I saw Sean's note in the chat. Yes, email me for sure. I wanted to conclude really by pausing and thanking Mena and Stephanie in particular. I want to thank the program directors as well. But in the end, the reason I'm in this racket is because of our students. What's amazing actually in this town hall is there are several of my former students on the screen. So hi, Irene, hi, Fausia, hi, Tanya, Evie, Clover. It's really great to see former students. It's great to have our current students. They're the ones, they're really the engines of the school. They never cease to amaze me with their work that they produce, with their ideas. The students are putting together a new journal. Nicholas is on the call and is one of the editors of the new journal that's coming out called Pairs. It'll be out in February. This is such a great job, and it's really because of the students. And so I just want to give a shout out to them and thank Mena and Stephanie for giving us their time this morning.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sarah. Just in terms of wrap up, I want to add a little bit of a comment to the BIPOC question. So BIPOC is Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And one of the things that Sarah was instrumental in launching after we had the tumultuous events of the summer was a racial equity and anti-racism fund. And that is a fund that we can draw upon to recruit students of color and to use in a variety of different ways around the GSD. So we would certainly encourage your support and your interest in that fund if this is an important issue to you like it is to us. I also wanted to say that we'll plan to do these town halls annually. And please write us, please write me, Peggy_Burns@harvard.edu, if you have other ideas of how often you'd like to have these. But we're looking at a variety of different alumni engagement formats. Another engagement opportunity, which Sarah has enforced and I've reinforced too, but we would really welcome your attendance at these design impact seminars. So the Alumni Council has done such a beautiful job of pulling together a collection of people around the world. We try to time these so that, again, like these meetings, people can participate in whatever time zone you're in for at least a component of the meeting. And there's a website for the design impact series, and we'll be sure that you're included in these, that you're all included in understanding and being invited to these in the future. So I'd like to thank you for that. As Mark mentioned, we would always welcome your support and engagement for additional grad student support. Michael Hayes talked about the value of funding open projects, which is a new key component of the MDES program. And then Martin really emphasized systematic connections with corporate partners in any ways that you can help us connect in that space. So you'll be hearing from us. We'll send an email out to you as a follow-up to this call. But if there's any direct conversation that you'd like to have, we're at your service. And we're just so grateful to each of you for being part of the GSD family. So thank you all. We bid you farewell and enjoy your evening or morning or day, whatever it is, wherever you are. So be well.